It's great to be able to talk. And I suppose initially when we got the email from Siobhan, we were like, no. You know, we work a lot with people that are living with domestic violence and sharing parenting. And I guess then I was thinking of my research. I just did a master's last year, finished it last year, but I did my research around the effect of domestic violence on post-separation parenting. And it was an investigation of the lived experience of Irish mothers. So I just thought actually it might be good to share some of the findings of that with the group. So I know the pillar on discrimination that I fall under is family status and marital status, or family and marital status. So hopefully this falls a little bit into what you're thinking, Siobhan. I suppose for me, for the mothers who took part in the study, it's great to be able to share the findings. So I'm really just going to work through the findings that came up for me in the research, and I'm sure they're all things that you'll be nodding your head and are aware of. I'm just going to go out of it being a slideshow, because this always happens to me with slideshows. They just don't seem to work as good on Zoom. So I'll just do it this way.
And can I just say again, anybody that's not on mute, if they could mute themselves, that would be great.
Okay, I'm just going to move all of you over to the side. So I suppose like I carried out the study, the research during the summer last year, so 2021, sort of over July and August. It was with a very small group of mothers. And the thematic analysis presented these as the key findings in the study, which were the prevalence of domestic violence and post-separation parenting. And there's some subheadings, I'll go through them in a few minutes. The impact of domestic violence on the mother, systemic barriers experienced by mothers living with domestic violence, and the availability of support and support services when living with domestic violence. So for the prevalence of domestic violence, the study highlighted that shared parenting was definitely a risk factor post-separation, consistent with research, you know, that found that the presence of children was associated with continued violence post-separation. 1/4 of mothers' lives are reported to be threatened post-separation by abusive ex-partners. And mothers reported fathers having little prior interest in their children, however, aggressively pursuing child contact post-separation. And that's consistent with research which claims that violent fathers see their children as emotional property with a sense of entitlement to them. The domestic violence was described as prolonged due to the nature of shared parenting, and mothers questioned why they left, comparing pre- and post-separation levels of violence. So in the italics are direct quotes from some of the mothers. You think getting them out of the house is the hardest, you think that is the worst, but it isn't. He got me in the garden and made conditions. You'll never be free, you will never go out, and I had to promise him. I naively thought once I was out, you know, we left, that we would be fine, but it wasn't. The children were used as weapons against me. I was threatened all the time. It was continual abuse. So the personal acknowledgement of domestic violence. So in the current study, all of the mothers named the personal difficulty they had in identifying their experience as domestic violence. Mothers described feeling inadequate as their partners berated their parenting skills, believing the experience to be their own fault, which is consistent again with research describing women as internalizing and undermining, and the humiliation experienced in domestic violence, resulting in low self-esteem, lack of confidence, and feeling of failures as mothers. One mother described the difficulty in acknowledging her experience. It was harder because I didn't know at the time. I didn't realize that was domestic violence. I thought it was just me. I have to kind of learn to move on from this with self-care and not involve him in my head, so that the children don't have him living here when he's not actually living here. Victim shaming was another area that came up. So shame and the acknowledgement of abuse leaves mothers feeling unsupported in their choice to leave. The Worsley study of domestic violence found that women felt massive shame, feeling they had not succeeded in their role as wife and mother. Research indicates that society holds women more accountable for familial harmony than fathers, which increases the sense of shame felt by women. And O'Connor found a sense of shame affected how women disclosed their experience, with 2 in every 5 afraid to tell anyone. The victim shaming and isolation were named by all the mothers as preventing them from seeking support or telling others what they experienced. Nobody knew what my life was like. There's still so much stuff that they don't know. There's probably so much stuff that nobody will ever know. They hadn't experienced what he did to me to get me to where I was. Still, they all still blame me for not walking away sooner. They don't see what you were doing with him in the first place. They just don't see it through your eyes. The second thematic area then is around the impact of domestic violence on the mother. And there's a number of core themes. And I suppose this is what I really wanted to look at. I wasn't wanting to specifically look at domestic violence, but the impact it had on the mother-child relationship and on mothering specifically. The parenting styles of mothers were keenly aware that the emotional impact of parenting with the prevalence of domestic violence had the power to change their parenting style from what they would like to offer to what they could offer. Mothers felt an urgency to protect children from any triggers that would bring children back to the abusive experience with their father. Mothers reported feeling a loss of control over their parenting, particularly when they saw their children reproduce their father's abusive behaviours. And this pattern of findings is consistent with literature that finds abusive ex-partners are likely to attempt to alienate children by blaming the mother. The children were described as so traumatized, leaving them with limited ability to cope with normal parenting and life events. My sister can give out to her kids. I can't do that to mine. What they have to go through, I don't put them on time out. It's hard. They're full of anxiety. My sister can give out to her 4 boys. I can give out to them, but X would break down if I give out to him. M2 described her children as very clingy. You know, they want to sleep on my bed and need that protection. She added that parenting is made difficult as you cannot disturb that safe place they have with you. Mothers described the guilt they have, which prevented them from using what they described as normal parenting strategies, instead trying to compensate for the experiences of their children. Child abuse. In the current study, 6 mothers reported that their children were abused, terrorised, and or manipulated in various ways post-separation by violent fathers. This is consistent with Morrison, who found that children are subjected to emotional abuse, such as name-calling, cruel put-downs, and distortion of their reality by telling of false and frightening stories. Further research found that children are left to feel responsible for safeguarding their mothers, as they often witness violent exchanges in which mothers are unable to protect them. And this in turn causes children to have a diminished capacity to see their caregiver as someone who can consistently respond to their distress and in turn can be relied on. Forced sleepovers every second weekend, the way the courts ordered, and the kids used to come home and tell me how they did not want to go again because they were locked in the attic in the dark. They didn't like the dark. The light was turned off and the downstairs door to the attic was shut. That's where they were left to sleep. That's caused trauma. He made a threat to my daughter. Daddy said he's going to come to the house and he's going to cut Mummy's head off with a saw, and then we will have to bring Mummy to the doctor. She saw birds sitting up on the roof of a local bank just up beside us, and she freaked. She said that they're Daddy's little birdies and he's going to hear everything I'm saying. Eventually, I managed to calm her down. Her dad had told her that his little bird is all over the place, and no matter where he is, he can hear what she's saying to her mom, and they will come back and tell him, and he will not be happy if she's talking about him. The erosion of motherhood. So Lapierre found the violent men intentionally and specifically target their partners' mothering, preventing mothers from being the mother they want to be. He found that men's attacks on mothering and the mother-child relationship are central to their exercise of control and domination. Elizabeth describes mothers as having painful limits placed on their mothering by violent men, while Melander reports that such behaviours on the part of violent fathers indicates to some extent how abusive men seem to understand how the institution of motherhood operates and can be used against women. All 6 mothers reported motherhood was intentionally eroded by violent fathers. So it was an absolute nightmare. It was a torture at every level. It was extremely difficult to be trying to be the best mother that you can, have been put through every form of torture, intimidation, hardship. It was a nightmare. He took years of motherhood away. He took away years of joy with my children. Normal stuff was destroyed. The ultimate goal was to destroy me. The mother-child relationship. Child access was reported by all mothers to place them in an untenable situation, continuously forcing children into unsafe situations. This compromised the mother's ability to offer security, as children continuously sought reassurance. One mother described it as impossible for domestic violence to not impact on the mother-child relationship. This breach of trust and the inability to keep children safe can rock the very foundation of secure relationships. Implementing an authoritative parenting style which results in a successful child development is only achievable when there's trust between the parent and the child, respect for each other, and recognition of the child's needs and the ability to meet those needs. Van der Kolk found that a secure attachment is less likely when there's domestic violence, leading to children experiencing more authoritarian parenting. It is impossible for domestic violence to not impact the mother-child relationship, as you're hanging on by an absolute thinnest thread. M3 described how she carried on, but I wasn't there. She described herself as being an automatic. I was just going through the motions. She wondered now if they felt that or saw that, describing her children as not having a normal start, but that she tried her best. I really tried not to make them go. They made me make her go, and she doesn't get that. So maybe her opinion of me is damaged because I'm supposed to keep her safe and I couldn't. She will always bring it up with me. Something seems to trigger her and she would start asking me questions, and she would say, "Did you know Daddy was locking us in the attic in the dark?" Now the older she gets, she questions, why did I let these things happen? So systemic barriers experienced by mothers living with domestic violence. The fear and control. Zioli found that mothers act strategically to minimize violence, leading them to use protective measures and agreeing to demands of violent men. Other research reports similar findings, indicating that mothers will find ways to manage the perpetrator's behaviour by monitoring moods and behaving in ways not to upset him. Francia reported that mothers are tethered to the court orders, enabling family violence to continue. And some of their mothers reported that courts failed to comprehend the impossible nature of sitting in a courtroom with a man they feared. Consistent with research reporting that survivors of domestic violence experience further abusive experiences in family courts because of the inconsistent and minimal provision of special measures to avoid them encountering perpetrators. All 6 mothers were driven by a sense of fear of feeling trapped by court orders, knowing they needed to comply with demands to safeguard themselves and their children. So every time basically we've gone to court on it because he can't accept, he'll just summons me again. I believe he gets a kick out of it. A big part of the reason why he has the access, and when he summons me so many times, it is the only way he can still try and control me. I think I've been summoned like 6 times by him in 2.5 years, so no wonder I broke down in November. No matter how much counselling I get, when he's too close to me, I'm afraid I don't think it'll ever go away. Family law courts. I'm conscious of the time, so I hope I'm doing okay on the time. Mothers described how fear held them back in the court. They felt the judge was blindsided by violent men, which Galanti describes as custody stalking and using the court as a mechanism to control shared access. Mothers felt the courts had a pro-contact culture which favoured violent men and totally disassociated violence from parenting. Evidence suggests that the courts minimised the impact of domestic violence on women and children, in turn impeding their attempts to gain safety and protection. Mothers felt forced to trust in the system at the expense of their child's well-being. Research found that mothers are made to take responsibility for fathers' violence, with no acknowledgement of children being victims, resulting in the rights of children and mothers being overridden by the rights of the fathers to maintain contact. The overall experience for mothers in court was one of hostility and blame, with mothers questioned up and down, while fathers were given a slap on the wrist. This is consistent with research finding that mothers were treated like badly behaved children in the court. Participants reported the physical and emotional response they had when going to court with their ex-partner. He's there, he's so confident, head up, And when I go in, my voice goes, my legs shake, I'm so nervous. I just don't know what he will say. I'm so afraid of him, it doesn't go away. I still have that fear of him. How a judge thinks we can go into court with strangers and do this, but it's the hardest thing to do. Knowing I'm still afraid of him after all these years. I'm always scared of him, but I couldn't tell the judge this. I say yes to everything. The judge says, keep up the good work. He doesn't understand. They don't have a clue. The system is wrong. When I go up, I'm still traumatized. The lies he comes out with, but I don't get a chance to go back up and say he's lying. The judge is still looking down at you, and then he just says this is this and this is that. Can you work a bit harder on this? X is coming out, high-fiving the solicitor. Now I'm breaking down. I'm not even out the door. I'm a mess. I just don't understand. I will do anything to settle outside the courtroom now. We're really stuck. There's no help. The onus on mothers to protect and safeguard children. The current study found that TEase, an agency perceived by mothers to protect and safeguard their children, were ill-equipped to understand what ongoing access with a violent father did to mothers and their children. Past research has highlighted the numerous problems women have experienced violence, who've experienced violence face when they're in contact with social workers. The expectation that exists in professional practice, in particular social work, is one that women should protect their children from their partner's violence by leaving them, while also completely failing to support mothers when they do. The magnitude at which mothers felt failed was evident across the findings, creating a real sense of sadness for mothers. Everything being under their radar, but nothing meets the threshold. They don't want to see the safety issues. No matter what you go to them with, they listen, they say they're busy, they won't get involved, work it out with the solicitor, and the solicitor says, go to TEase. I need support from somebody. Nobody gives the help. She, the social worker, doesn't understand the effect it has on me sending them. Mothers implied that in rural Ireland, fathers were given the benefit of the doubt by local professionals, which often resulted in ongoing domestic violence. And the final thematic area was the availability of support and support services in living with domestic violence. Mothers described how violent ex-partners had eroded their friendships and controlled any social networks they once had. This is consistent with Lapierre, who found that survivors of domestic violence reported that their partners had successfully isolated them from family and friends. Support systems can help to mobilise a mother into seeking change, which makes it understandable why violent ex-partners work hard at eroding social support networks, knowing them to be a threat. Early intervention and ongoing support were described as limited or non-existent in rural communities. I need support from somebody that's going to keep it on. Support access from services like Women's Aid, One Family and the Women's Refuge were seen by mothers as lifelines. I've been really lucky that I came across One Family because I was able to participate in an evening class. That realisation that you know you're not the only one struggling every day. I would pick up the phone and really they're like heroes to me. They're for me and we check in weekly. I have a good chat. They just calm me down and they'll just make suggestions. Coping repertoires of mothers. Mothers describe being driven by a need to safeguard their children, which is consistent with Elizabeth finding mothers are driven by a sense that they must protect their children. In the current study, mothers indicated how the reoccurring nature of abuse was so difficult with no opportunity to rest and heal. Harrison and Holt found that for mothers to rebuild their lives, recover their physical, mental and emotional health, confidence and parenting capacities and support their children's recovery after separating from an abusive partner, they need freedom from further abuse. When asked how mothers were coping with their situation, so how do I survive? I've no idea. I wish I knew because you could bottle it and sell it or advise other people, but I don't know. Staying busy while children were in access featured as a key coping mechanism for some mothers. One mother shifted her focus from believing change would happen due to the lack of support to focusing on what she could do. Concentrate on working on the kids, getting ready for the next access, not a great process. The requirement of dual consent. Brand found that children living with domestic violence often have psychological issues. 3 of the mothers returned to the court to gain consent before the child access supports. One mother said her daughter was suicidal before the court agreed to override the father's consent. There's little evidence in research of the challenges of dual consent. However, One Family and Rainbows Ireland both confirmed that dual consent is a real issue on the ground in children's support services. Findings highlighted that dual consent for children's support services often meant children failed to access support. Fathers were described as using this as a tool to return to court, and 2 mothers described having to go to court to get consent when their children reached dangerous levels. Last slide. So just some of the recommendations that came from the study were, that there needs to be further in-depth research to understand the prevalence of domestic violence post-separation in Ireland, because I guess a lot of people think it ends at the point of separation when we know it doesn't. The development of a national body with responsibility for all aspects of domestic violence to support the communication of the intersecting needs of the courts, TUSLA, family support services and families. So I guess it's that whole thing of Hester's 3 planets, we're all coming at it in a different direction. Mothers and children need to be heard, believed and supported when they recognise domestic violence and try to leave. Where domestic violence is named as a feature, the courts should give special consideration to child abuse and safe access. Develop support services focused on the psychological well-being of children, supporting the mother in her ability to support her own child. And recognising children as victims and training specialist staff within the judiciary, ensuring children's rights and needs are upheld and their voices heard. This would support a move towards safe contact and a shift on the onus for mothers to safeguarding and protecting children. Okay. That was a whistle top tour. I'm sorry, I've gone over the time. Maybe
not at all, Geraldine. That was great, and you were right on time. You couldn't have timed it better. That was really interesting and very poignant, I have to say, to hear the voices and the words of the women, from my perspective anyway. Has anybody got any pertinent questions they'd like to put to Geraldine now, or do you want to wait till you hear all 3 speakers and then to have a general conversation at the end?
Yeah, general conversation at the end would be great. Thank you.
Great. Anya, your hand up, or it's down again?
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment this really great research, Geraldine, and like all of those themes that came through are huge in their own right. Yeah, I hope to see it in many more forums. I know I'll be recommending it. It's really good. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Anya.
Oh, there's a question here. Somebody's asking you if any pregnant women were interviewed in your research, Geraldine.
No, none of them are pregnant, and the youngest child actually was 3, and they went right up to the oldest was 19. So no pregnant people, and they all had left over a period of years. Like, they weren't very recent, but they except the access was ongoing. That was the key thing.
And a follow-on question from that was, did women reference abuse in pregnancy in your research?
Yeah, a number of the women, but I'm just thinking of one woman in particular. She said that she really noticed a change during the pregnancy, where she was being berated a lot around, not looking after herself properly and not eating properly. And what was she trying to do? Like, was she trying to harm the baby before it was even born? And then as soon as the baby was born, lots more comments like that. Like, I remember her telling me that the father reported her and said she was feeding the baby salt all the time, and that's why the baby was sick. So constant niggling and badgering at her that started in the pregnancy but continued right through, and then just got worse, up to the point, I think the child was 3 when there was a violent assault one day, and she described the child lying on top of her, and like, he didn't fully obviously understand what was going on, but he was saying that he was telling the mommy that he was going to mind her, not let daddy hurt her anymore, and that was her trigger to leave, which is very evident in the research when you look at it. But the child is very cautious of her, because he thinks he has to look after his mom instead of his mom looking after him. But that was the turning point for her, that she had to go. Yeah.
And just a final question on that. Was there any inquiries, or did any of the women mention any inquiries from midwives or public health nurses after the birth of children?
No.
Nobody mentioned
they weren't mentioned at all. Yeah. there was a real struggle for support in rural Ireland. Like I was very fortunate in that the people were from right around the country. There's a lot of feedback coming there, I think, from Sylvia's. Maybe if people can mute.
If people could mute it, I think somebody has maybe got a speaker on it. Everybody could mute. That would be fantastic.
So the people in the study were right from Galway, Donegal, Dublin, Tipperary, Mayo, and Kerry. So it was interesting as you went around the country, the different level of supports. Just, yeah, it was really difficult, but the nurses weren't mentioned actually.
Okay, thanks, Geraldine. So unless there's any further questions directly for Geraldine, as was pointed out, a lot of missed opportunities there that the midwives and public health nurses weren't aware of the situation, that there were missed opportunities there. And hopefully we can learn from them. And it's interesting as well that we get the Western Seaboard perspective there from your work as well, because I suppose a lot of the research does come from the Eastern Seaboard and maybe more urban areas. Anyway, Anya and Valeria, does anybody want to go second? Valeria? Great. Can you share your screen, or do you need it to screen share, or will we just have you?
No, it's just me.
Perfect. I'm going to put you on speaker view. I don't know, does that make a difference?
I'm sorry. I'm jealous now of Geraldine because she has very nice slides and everything. Anything. So like first, thank you for the invitation for being here at the panel. I thought that was such a nice and very thoughtful idea on discussing domestic violence through the lens of our equality legislation and the 9 grounds. So I'm very happy to be here today to give some insights on our work and everything. My name is Valeria Aquino, like you mentioned. I am a migrant woman from Brazil. I came to Ireland in 2012 for a 6 months course, very short. And here I am 10 years later. So I love the country and I met my partner and I decided to stay, and I'm very grateful for it. I love Ireland. I am social worker. I have a degree in social worker from Brazil. I worked there. So I'm working in this sector for over 20 years now. Here in Ireland, I work for the Immigrant Council of Ireland. I am the coordinator for 2 helplines. One is the Anti-Racism Support Service, where we provide support to victims of racism and discrimination, all under our equality legislation and all the legislation we have available to cover racism and discrimination, of course. And I am the coordinator also for the Community Navigators, which is a project that provides support to migrant women victims of domestic violence. So at this project specifically, it's myself as coordinator and 6 more women from different nationalities. So they can focus on their own community and how to outreach and how to communicate about the services and provide support to the woman according to their needs. So it's a very, of course, we have like a more general methodology of work, but we try to tailor especially our outreach to really provide the best services we can depending on their culture and their needs. So we have a lady from Brazil, another lady from the Pakistani community, one lady living in direct provision, another lady from Mongolian community. So like it's very diverse. And this is very good as well, even as experience for us as service providers, because we can have the very broad viewing on how to really reach out and what are the needs from this group. Of course, like as a migrant woman myself, working for a migrant rights organization, I will be focusing on migrant women, which is connected to, which fall under the race on our equality legislation. So will be my focus for my talk today. As a migrant woman, I think like we grow up in a different country with different cultures. So of course, like our understanding on violence, on domestic violence and gender-based violence, it is a combination of course, what our life is, what is around us, our culture and everything we are living. So of course, myself as Brazilian, my viewing on what domestic violence is, how gender-based violence, what gender-based violence is different than a woman from Pakistan, for example, because her lived experiences are different than mine. But one thing I can say for you for sure, like any woman, no woman at all like to be abused. Any woman accepts the abuse. And this is the reason why they come to us for support. So the thing we need to really keep in mind is like the cultural background of that client. It doesn't change the need of her to reach out for support, and doesn't change the fact that she's not happy and she wants to change. She wants change. So of course, like for example, we have the cultural aspect of your client. It is something that affects your ability of supporting, because of course their values are different. So for example, we have clients that they have a very strong family value and they feel very threatened with the idea of being a separate woman from a broken marriage. They feel like this is affect their honor of their family. Their family would not support the separation because they feel that it's like a stain on the family if a woman is separate from her husband. And so the only difference is maybe this woman, she would take a little bit longer to decide to leave because she has all this weight on her that she needs to follow this tradition and this thing, even though that she's now in a completely different country with a completely different culture. She still have these values on her. She still carry this cultural background with her. Of course, like even the countries that are more conservative, they are changing. Like I can see even Brazil that is a little bit more progressist. Like from my mom is 72 years old, like her viewing on domestic violence, on gender-based violence, it's completely different than mine, a 42-year-old woman. That is completely different than my sister, which is 10 years younger than me. So like through the generations, you have this change and this switch of like the role of woman in society and what is acceptable or no in a relationship. And so we need to always be really open to talk and to listen from them, to be able to understand better their reactions. But this doesn't stop us from giving and providing them the best service we can. Of course, like with all this cultural background and all this pressure from your culture, when it's very hard for you to decide, okay, so I'm leaving the relationship. But so when we decide to leave the relationship, we face some barriers that is not common for like an Irish woman that it lives here, speaks the language and have more facility on reaching out the services. Of course, like as a migrant, we come here most of the time just ourselves and our partners, ourselves or partners and our kids. Like we leave behind the whole support system we have when we are born and living in the same country our whole life. Like from my family from Brazil, I am the only one here. My closest friend is my cousin that lives in Switzerland. So it's not the case if I need the support, I can just pick up the phone and say, can you stay with my daughter for 1 hour so I can go to somewhere else? Like that doesn't happen with migrant women because we miss all this support system. Of course, as well, like we have, because you are here most like with your partner, you rely on your partner a lot, like financially, for example, for many reasons. Like most of the time is not the woman's decision to be financially dependent on the partner. It can be due to a visa restriction, like the stamp 3, for example, visa. The stamp 3 is the visa you get if your partner is coming to Ireland as like a general permit, work general permit visa. And so if your partner is coming to Ireland to work in a general permit, they give you the stamp 3 visa. The stamp 3 visa don't allow you immediate access to work. You can work, but in order to work, you need to first find a job. And so your employer would have to apply for a permission for you. And what happened is most companies, they have no idea how the visa system works, and they would just not select you to work because they think that it's a big work and that you have to wait a lot until you get the permission. And so like this stop women from access the job, the places as well. Also, like here in Ireland, the childcare, it's very expensive. And being a family with just one source of income, at the end of the day, it's the only option you have is for you to care for your kids yourself, because you are not able to pay for any support for childcare, for example. And so the woman end up staying just in the house. And for this reason as well, this have another negative impact on her, which is like an emotional and a social dependency on this partner as well, because most of the time, like your partner and your kids, they are the only people you have access to and you have a relationship with in the country you are in. And so, for example, if you, as you don't have all the support system you have, you need to rely on this person that is abusive to you to do everything. And also, because you depend on him so much, it is hard for you to navigate the system independently. So it would be harder for you to reach out for information, for example, on how to find support, because you don't speak the language properly, because like how you start to learn English and you are not practicing because you are constantly just speaking your language. Like we do have clients, for example, that it's in Ireland living for over 10 years and don't speak English at all, living with their partners. Because of this, because it's part of the abuse, this control of the victim. And it's very intentionally not giving her the access to learn the language. And so she would be dependent on him, even to go to the chemist to buy a medicine or to go to the GP, or your partner became like your interpreter. And for an abuser, this is a perfect situation. He has completely control over all the information you access. And so this is something that it's very particular of migrant women for victims of domestic violence, is they are very extremely isolated due to the language and due to completely lack of the support system they have. Of course, just a second, let's see my notes here. And so like, even though when they wish to and they find the information they need, and okay, like I'm a migrant woman, I know about Women's Aid and I want to contact them for support. Most of the organizations working with supporting victims of domestic violence, they work a lot through the phone. And for women that doesn't domain the English too well, to have a conversation in the phone is really challenging. I know, like myself, like I arrived here 10 years ago, but I just felt really, really comfortable on picking up the phone and dealing with something, even like my bank or in college or anything, like maybe like 2-3 years after I arrived here. Because one is like you need to really be able to listen the person properly, and you have all the accents and things like this. It's very hard. It looks like it's not, but it is very difficult. And also because like you don't have this connection with the person that is there, because you were always like, I don't know if I will be able to tell her with details what's going on. Will she understand what I'm saying, or I will just waste my time with this call? And so it's really stop women, especially the ones that have difficult with the language on reaching out to the services. Also, like the interpretation services, we know that a lot of organizations, they have already, but of course they are not available all the time. And you need to sometimes call and arrange for the interpreter to be there. Or sometimes, like, I know, I think Women's Aid, they have the phone interpreters as well. But even to be able to find the interpreter, you need to be able to pick up the phone and say you need the interpreter. So it is hard as well for her even to have this first step. And one issue that we have, and we are consistently listen from our clients, is regarding to the quality of interpretation services. Like I heard, like everything you can imagine about problems with interpretation. Like we had a client that she had an interpreter in court accompanying her for a hearing, and she had to correct the interpreter all the time because she wasn't translating properly what she was saying, and she was scared that she would be misunderstood in court. Like, this is a very serious issue. We had a Brazilian girl as well that she asked for an interpreter, and they provided her for an interpreter in Portuguese, but Portuguese from Portugal, not Portuguese from Brazil. And Portuguese from Portugal, it's different than Portuguese from Brazil. There is a lot of like wording is different. Like it's like if of course you can understand, but if you are dealing especially with more technical information you want to pass to the client, like about her legal rights or something really more specific, that it is better that she has the Brazilian Portuguese interpreter instead of just Portuguese from Portugal. So you make sure she really understands what the person is saying. Of course, other supports, for example, that for Irish women would be easier is like the social welfare and housing. It's very complicated for migrant women. One, because we don't understand the system. We have no idea like where to go or which kind of support is available, like if I am entitled to or no. Like the lack of information is huge. And of course, like you need to be entitled to have these supports to be able to reach out to them. And depending on your visa, you can't, like a stamp 2 holder visa person, for example, she cannot have access to social welfare or housing. Or also, for example, for undocumented migrants, which is also, it's very common that a woman became undocumented due to the abuse, because if your visa is attached to your relationship, like a stamp 3 or a stamp 4 for marriage, for example, you depend on being in this relationship to have the visa, and your partner needs to provide you with his documents for you to apply for your visa. And most of them would not give them the documents, and the woman will become undocumented, which is also a way of him to abuse her, because we have hearing from our clients that they are constantly being threats of being reported to the immigration and being deported because they are undocumented, and then they are undocumented because of the abuse. And so it's all like this abusive partner to creating ways of controlling and being really like having them as much control as he can in the life of this woman. For example, and also like what we experience a lot is that even when the woman have access to social welfare and housing, she has the right to access, she has the right visa, there is like a lack of information within the staff working on the housing departments and the social welfare that she is actually entitled to have. And so like we had a couple of clients that we had to go back and saying like, but look, and sending them the piece of information where, oh, look, this visa is stamped for, she can access housing. And so she would be back there with the piece of paper to prove she has the right to access. Or even like we had to contact, to refer clients to lawyers so she could review her application for social welfare support because she was denied as well due to her visa. Like it is really something that we need to work better on, understanding the visas and the access to these supports as well. About the support at the refuges, for example, of course, like you have to leave your house and go to a completely different place. And most likely the person that is working there will not speak your language. And if you have problem with speaking English, it would be very hard for you to be by yourself there and being able to understand everything that it's being saying to you and the information they are providing and what you have to do. And it's a lot of things going on since you arrived in the refugee. They want to access you. They want to access your needs. They want to provide you with information, how to find support. And if you cannot understand this information, like it makes very hard. And also one issue that we can hear from our clients that had experience going to the refuge is, for example, the issue with childcare. Because when you are at the refuge, you are normally not close to your house. And if you have kids in school age, you will not be able to bring them to school if you are in the refuge. So you would have your kids 24/7 with you, and you would have a lot to do. You need to go to Dolphin's house, you need to go to the social fair, you need to go to the housing department, and you have all the kids with you. And it is tough. And also like you don't have even the headspace to really be there and I don't know, like get well emotionally to be able to do all these activities that it's really draining you, which is different, for example, for if you are a local, you can ask your mother to mind the kids for a couple of hours, or you have your auntie that across the road, or you know your way to navigate. But again, as a migrant, you know anybody most of the time, and you don't have, and the people you know for short period of time, you would not call them and say, oh, can you stay with my 3 kids for the whole day so I can do some things? Like it's not this level of relationship yet, so it's difficult. At the courts, it is another issue as well, because again, you don't understand the system, you don't understand the law, you don't know what's going on, like who is who there, even basic stuff like what can I say, what I cannot say here, like what are my rights. And you can feel as well that woman is being discriminated a lot on the decisions, who would have access and when. Like as a migrant, is important for you. For example, like for me, I'm from Brazil, my parents live in Brazil. I cannot imagine not bringing my daughter for my parents to see, or like so she can meet her grandparents. And I have friends, like a friend of mine, for example, very personal friend, her son just met her mother when he was 6 years old, because the father never gave the permission for her to travel to Brazil with the kids. And his reasoning was like, the Brazil is very dangerous and he could not allow the kid to travel. When he had money, he had very good lawyers, and always constantly in court he was getting on his own way, and she had just to deal with. And this is like, even after the separation, also a way of controlling the partner. And of course, like the language barriers, they are still there as well. Of course, like we have a lot of issues in general on accessing support for victims of domestic violence in Ireland that, like Irish women, everybody it's facing, like a not effective legislation, for example, or lack of psychological support. Like it's crazy how you cannot find, like, especially free of charge. Like, I don't know where to refer clients anymore. Like I begging people to see my clients. Like it's really upsetting at this stage. Of course, not enough legal support, depending on like if they cannot access the legal aid, they are really in trouble. Like they don't have where to go. Like for us, like the Immigrant Council of Ireland, we do have lawyers, but our lawyers, they are specialized in immigration issues. They are not family law lawyers. So we cannot provide this kind of services to them. And it's very upsetting to see them like walking in court with a lawyer that they just met there because it's the lawyer they found, and they have no idea what the story of the case is. Like it's bad, it's really bad. But of course, yeah, I think the main thing about this talk that I'm doing now and the issues I am telling you is that, like, we don't want a different service for migrant women. We just want to be able to access services at the same level as an Irish woman with a good English can access, and being able to, I don't know, to enjoy of the support we have and the legislation we already have right now. And unfortunately, we are not being able to access for all the reasons I mentioned before. It's really challenging, but I believe now, like, we are getting on the way of good change. Like we are, I think, just the consultation for the 3rd national strategy on gender-based violence just finished, I think, on the 10th of March, I think was the deadline to send submissions. So I think when the migrant ethnic minority communities, they were consulted for the strategy. So I think a lot of good change is coming as well. Like we also, a couple of months ago, we organized ethnic minority observatory, domestic abuse observatory, where organizations working with supporting migrant women victims of domestic abuse, they are together to talk about their services, to try to collaborate, to try to share expertise. And so I think we are starting to go somewhere and starting to improve the services. And yeah, I think that's it.
That's great, Valeria. Thank you very much. Sorry, am I pronouncing your name right, Valeria?
Yeah.
Has anybody got any pertinent, immediate questions they'd like to run to Valeria before we move on, or do you want to leave them to the end? Sorry, just there's one here now. Do you think, sorry, it's a long one. So somebody is saying, thanks for your presentation, highlighting the structural deficits that need to be addressed. Do you think greater access to translated posters, etc., to signpost women to safety should be available widely in hospitals, pharmacies, shops, toilet doors? And the question is also, can migrant women seek support from refugees? The 2 questions: should there be more posters in translation posters, and also can women access refugees?
Yes, definitely. And I think even not just physical posters in places where we will have to go, for example, schools or GPs, places that we go not just because we need support for domestic violence. I think they're more the strategic place to put this kind of information. And also online, because if you are searching on Google, for example, if you have in your own language, it's good because you can just type in your own language and it will direct you to the information in your own language. Yes, I think like as much information as possible. Of course, today, like we have like on the web page, depending on which provider you are using to access the internet, you can translate the pages on the top. So it's easier. You don't have to have your web page in various languages because it will translate automatically. But I think this kind of information and tricks on how to find information, I think it has to be passed to migrant communities so they are able to more independently looking for information as well. So I think, yeah.
And the a follow on from that was a suggestion that there's a midwife in St. Luke's and Kilkenny has used QR codes to translate HSE documents to many languages, which I suppose might be helpful to other agencies such as our own, because we also would try and translate, but the cost of translating into every language that's spoken in the country is, we don't get funding for that, and that would be a funding stream in its own right, and all that as well. Just in response to the question about whether migrant women can access refuges, different refuges are all independent organisations. Oh, thanks, Amy Carroll is the midwife. I'll follow that up. Different refuges have different admissions policies. Just for your information, for everybody here, Clare Haven will admit any woman. We don't look at migrant status. If a woman is being subjected to domestic abuse and she's at risk in her home, then she has access to our service. And likewise, if she can't access the refuge, she has access to our service in an outreach capacity. And also, just for the information of people present, the childcare issue is massive that you touched upon. And again, Clare Haven Services are incredibly fortunate to have an amazing team of children and young people service workers who do offer childcare to women, both in refuge and in our outreach service, who do need to go to court or legal aid or social welfare or any of those statutory services. So they are there as well if you are passing on information. Again, that's not something that all refuges or all services have, but we are very
yeah, I think the policies, they really differ, especially as well on the length of time they can stay. Because, for example, if you are applying for a visa, it takes long for you to get the visa approval, and you need the visa to be able to access housing, for example. And so, like, we had a very critical case a couple of weeks ago of a lady that she was waiting for the immigration services on her visa application, and the refuge say, like, look, we can just stay with you here for 12 weeks, and the 12 weeks it's expiring in 2 weeks, you need to leave. And we were like crazy trying to find accommodation for her, and at the end, like, we could arrange for an extension, like for 2 weeks for her. And meanwhile, we had to go to a lawyer, and we had to like speed up her visa application so she could access emergency accommodation through the housing department. But it is like, I think it's good for the refugees if they can have this flexibility and try to, of course, accommodate, if it is possible, for her to stay a little bit longer if she's waiting for a decision or something like this. I think it would be nice.
It would, and likewise in our service here in Clare, we don't necessarily have that ability to do that extension either. We have quite a finite length of time that a woman can stay in refuge, and that's just based on resources as well, because for every bed that's taken, there could be somebody else who needs that bed, you know, and if somebody is the domestic abuse situation is past, but they're no longer in need of refuge, because refuge is safety, they are in need of housing and emergency housing. So it is a bit of joined up thinking between the different services, and you know, the local authority to step up to the plate a little bit more there as well, I would suggest, and Department of Justice to take on responsibility as well. But that is one of the factors. There is a finite period of time that any woman can stay in refuge for her own mental health and for the children's development as well. But so is that another question? Nope, that's all the questions at the moment, unless anybody has anything.
I was just going to say something, Siobhan, that when I was doing the research, like, it was obviously during COVID and we'd had a year of COVID, but a lot of the women said that, you know, they could see an increase in services being signposted because of COVID and the increase of domestic violence. But prior to that, they I suppose felt many of the same things that Valeria is saying, that they did really struggle with understanding what support would be there if they were to leave, if they were to do this. Absolutely no understanding of how the district courts work, and applying for orders. So, you know, I think, you know, some Irish women would have a lot in common with migrant women, in just the lack of information and not understanding entitlements of what to do, and the anxiety of not knowing. So like it definitely has improved over COVID, but I guess that's probably an area that just needs to be worked on overall. It doesn't it, that
Yeah, I think housing is just like, I don't know what we're gonna do to improve housing here. Like it's really critical at this stage. And like the ideal for migrant woman would be like if she's applying for independent status visa, that she get like a temporary visa permission so she can access housing immediately, instead of, because so she has the 12 weeks that she's in the refuge to find the temporary accommodation or the emergency accommodation through the housing department like everybody. But like it is hard. Like we are trying to talk to them all the time about the change, but let's keep doing.
Absolutely, yes. And it is about that joint up thinking. If one rule is something is going to immediately impact some other rule that makes them non-compatible. Anyway, Anya, we'll move on to Anya, and then we'll have a general discussion hopefully at the end. Anya, do you have a fancy PowerPoint, or are you yourself alone, or
yeah, a bit of both. I do.
Okay, great. Can you share there, or do I need to do some?
Yeah, I'd say I can. I just want to say thanks for having me today. I'm a little bit hoarse. I'm actually at home with COVID at the moment. So I ask you to speak up if they can't hear me, or I don't want to at any stage. I would say thank you very much for coming here today to talk about, and it's really interesting, the topic around discrimination, and I'm here to talk about age. One spectrum of age, which is for children and young people under 18.
Just to say, only you are kind of disappearing in and out. I don't know where your mic is or something.
Yeah. No, if I go like this, it might be a bit better. So it really is to talk about age and children and young people. We're looking at domestic violence and abuse. So Siobhan asked me to come and talk about the work that we've been doing as part of what's called the Empower Kids project, which many of you may or may know. So I work for Bernardo's. I'm the national coordinator for the Child Domestic Violence and Abuse project. So I suppose the larger remit of my job is children and domestic violence, but at the core and at the very essence, the aim of the project is increasing the visibility as children as victims of domestic violence and abuse in their own right. When we started on this journey a number of years ago, we decided to define what does this look like, what does children's experiences look like. Many definitions out there did not include children. They may have included children as bystanders, they may include them as witnesses, but they were never named as direct victims or as impacted by domestic violence. So we spent a lot of time looking at this, and we are linked to many different networks. We have established a community of practice, which many of you may attend and are welcome to attend. And we brought this to community of practice, which is a forum of sort of frontline services around Ireland, looking at topics, various topics around domestic violence. So we kind of started to look at what does this mean? What does children's experiences mean? Because everybody could be thinking of something different. And we went along the journey for 2.5 years of coming together to produce a shared understanding of childhood domestic violence and abuse. And I'll show that to you later. Part of defining children's experiences of domestic violence and abuse could not in any way happen in isolation from children and young people themselves. We started then on a journey of children's participation to really look at how can we capture the experience of domestic violence and abuse from a child's point of view. So that was we've been on a 2-year journey with that. The very first year we asked children and young people to define it, and we have come up with a children's definition, which is part of that shared understanding paper, which I'm more than happy to circulate after today. And we produced a short 1-minute video. And then last year, we worked with many more services. So we put out the invite to services around Ireland, and we have 13 services who worked with us. And we engaged 30 children and young people from around Ireland. And the theme last year really was what matters for children and young people who live with domestic violence and abuse. So I'm not going to sit here and talk about what I think the issues for children and young people that live with domestic violence and abuse. I'll present really the work of the children to date. There's many children from young people, I'd say, from Clare and Limerick who've been involved in this. So Valerie Gleeson, the TLC coordinator, engaged children and young people across Limerick and Clare, as did Adapt in Limerick. So Just find the right presentation here and I'll start from here. Now, can everybody see that? See that? Is that gone again? From
Yep, can see that. Thank you.
it's not going. Is that working okay? Is it just one slide?
It's your
Yeah.
it's the slides there, yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to really start at the UNCRC and looking at childhood domestic violence and abuse from a children's rights perspective. So 2 articles really come to mind from, like, as Matt, you could touch on many more, but 2 of them which I'm going to mention here today. So Article 19, which gives every child to be free from violence, including the threat of violence. And Article 12, which gives the right of every child to freely express his or her views in all matters affecting her or him, and to have those views given due weight according to the child's age and maturity. So those, if we look at child domestic violence and abuse from a children's rights perspective, children have a right to be heard, to be seen. Children are asking very much to be heard and seen and considered as victims of domestic violence and abuse in their own right. So what is the Empower Kids project? As I mentioned, there's 14 services from around Ireland. We cover counties from Tipperary, Limerick, Clare, Galway, Mayo, Longford, Louth, Meath, Dublin, and I'm sure I've missed out, and a national organisation as well. So I'm sure I've missed out a couple of counties there. So as I said, 30 children and young people have participated last year, with the further number, maybe up to 10 children the year before as well. So we facilitate the Empower Kids project with these services, and our overall aim is to hear what children and young people are saying about their experiences of domestic violence and abuse, and advise on how we can adapt our responses as a result. I'm just going to move something here. In fact, I probably didn't share sound because I'm going to play a video in a few minutes. Sorry now, guys. This is the technical issue, so I should be well adapted at this stage. So let me look at how we went about doing participation. So when we started looking at this first, we got tied up a lot in ethics and ethics. So we realized that there's some models out there to support us to hear the voice of children and young people. So we looked at the Lundy model of participation. The Lundy model is the model of choice that's in the national policy. It is also adopted by TUSLA as well. And the focus is on 4 stages. So space, voice, audience, and influence. So that each child, before they were assessed as being physically and emotionally safe at the time of their participation in this project. Each individual agencies engage children on a one-to-one basis and assess that physical and emotional safety, and that was prioritized throughout their time. They were given time to give voice and given many methods of way they could contribute their voice as well. We had many materials and engagement tools to support workers who are engaging children and young people to support their voice be heard in the right way, depending on their age and development as well. Audience and influence, well, that's, I suppose, work that's we've been happening here today, and that's been happening over the last number of months. The children and young people in this project have been involved in the children's consultation for the 3rd National Strategy that Valeria mentioned. They've also given submission into the family law reform courts that's happening at the moment, and they're currently working with the NCCA, the national curriculum, to create a webinar for teachers to explain about how best to support children in the classroom who are living with domestic violence. So we're working hard at the national project, at the Childhood Domestic Violence Project, on that audience and influence section of the Lundy model. So how did this happen? So the agency collaboration has been the foundation of this project. We have consultations with our Scottish counterparts that have participated in this work over the last 5 years as well. Choose the Lundy model, and we devised a framework for collaboration so that all agencies around the table came around, had the same understanding of what the work was about, how we could best support children, and to support children if any child protection or any emotional concerns were arising as a result of this work. So over the last couple of years, a number of key themes emerged very much throughout the work. Just to go through a couple of them here with you today. Huge theme that was emerging is children want to be seen and heard and have really massive capacity and want to help others. The children, when last year before we were due to launch the work, we asked the children and young people, well, what has this meant to you? What have you enjoyed about being involved in the Our Kids project? And overwhelmingly, they wanted to help other children living with domestic violence and abuse. They wanted to help professionals understand what it is really like for them. We've named an animation that I'll share with you soon called See Me, Hear Me, Keep Me Safe. And though the title of that really came from all the feedback from the children and young people, the desire to be seen as victims of domestic violence and abuse, to be heard and to be kept safe. The trauma of children and young people that emerges in their day, that impacts on their day-to-day functioning was outstanding. And that thread, as you will see in the animation, was carried through. We really wanted to highlight and give voice to the children, what they were saying about that impact from the time they got up in the morning till the time they went to bed. The graphics that you'll see in the animation all came from the children themselves as well. In one of the school scenes, the children had said they would like that everybody is blurred and that we can't see their faces. All we can see and think about is mum at home. All we can think about is what's happened at home. They can't engage in school on these days. So it was just really important for us to highlight. Children have said they felt invisible in their day-to-day lives. And you can see the picture that I'm showing you here now. This was drawn by one of the young people involved in the project, that way that they had to wear a mask with other professionals, with other people, family and friends. And that mask came on and off at different points throughout the day. So children really expressed a desire to be involved in decision making. They wanted information about courts. They wanted information about what's happening next. They wanted information about schools and where they're going. And they wanted not only to be involved in decision making, they understood that they would not be the decision makers ultimately, but that they wanted to be consulted in that process. They felt that they wanted to have a say in access, they wanted to have a say in court matters, and they want to have a say in their schooling, and they want to have a say in all aspects of their lives. So it's not just around, I suppose, one specific part of their lives that we feel they should be heard and seen. They wanted to be involved in decision making all day in everything that affects their day-to-day lives. Huge importance role of the non-offending parent and siblings, and again you'll see that emerging throughout the animation. And a sense of justice and accountability in part of their fathers, in this case their fathers. They wanted their dads to be held accountable for what happened in the violence and the abuse, and that accountability took many forms. It wasn't just that, you know, that the court heard them or that social workers believed their story or anything. It was that sometimes they wanted their dad to get help. Sometimes they wanted their dad to take responsibility. Sometimes they just wanted it to stop. Sometimes they wanted the guards to go talk to their dads as well. So that sense of accountability took many forms for the children and young people. They felt that they get in trouble when they're not behaving well. They get in trouble in school. They get in trouble if they're, I'm not going to, the direct quote was, we get in trouble for being bad. Why don't they? And I hate to say that about children's behaviour being bad, but I suppose that's just a direct quote from the children themselves. So a real sense of justice, that this is wrong and that it's not right. If you look at the developmental stages of children and young people, that sense of justice and that looking at that stage of right and wrong really is strong in that school age children. And if from a domestic violence lens, that becomes quite distorted in terms of what's right and wrong, especially through a lens of coercive control. Schools played a huge role in the lives of children. It's no surprise. It came back strongly across all the feedback from children and young people. A small minority of children and people felt their safety was compromised, but overwhelmingly for children and young people, they were saying children, our schools was a place of safety and a place of respite. And I suppose if we think of COVID over the last number of years and their levels of the amount of time that children were out of schools, that further isolated children and young people and further silenced children and young people over the last number of years and reduced those opportunities for children to seek help and get support. And it's no surprise that both separation abuse and access featured in the feedback of children and young people. So I'm going to play an animation. I feel I need to give it a little bit of, if you haven't seen it already, many of you may have, maybe just a little bit of a pre-play warning. I'm not sure what guidance I put on this animation if it was going out to, in the movie theatres. I always come back to Katie Lamb's research from Melbourne. One of the quotes from the children and young people said, "If my life was a movie, I wouldn't be allowed to see it." You know, and in a way, that this animation may be triggering if any of those of you who may have experienced domestic violence abuse from whatever capacity. So just take note that this video may be distressing. Now I need to hide you. Can you tell me if this doesn't, sound doesn't come across? The first couple of slides, sound doesn't come across anyway.
When I'm with Mammy and Aoife, I want to draw a rainbow all around us to keep us happy. But Daddy gets angry. I get scared. I wish he would stop because I don't want anyone to get hit. Aoife tries to protect me, but I wish I was far away from all the fighting and the noise.
But sometimes it's like a deathly silence, and the atmosphere takes over the home and seeps into every pore. I want to protect Sean in a way that I never had been, to take him upstairs, away from it all, and make him safe. But when he gets angry, you just freeze. You accept that it's going to happen, and you have no control. You feel invisible, and that feeling follows us all day. When we go to school, it has a really big effect on us.
I try to blend in, but I still think about all the fighting and hating. I wish I was able to tell my friends or the teacher, but I can't because I'm scared, and they don't know what's happening in my family. Is this normal?
I worry all the time. I worry about what might happen to Mum. Is she okay now? I worry that me or Sean might get hurt. And I worry about Mum getting upset if Dad does do something to us. It's too much responsibility, and it can be totally overwhelming. I'd like to be noticed more. Sometimes I might look okay, but really I'm hurting. And I show my teacher my mask, so I can disappear behind it.
The Gardaí come to our house sometimes. When that happens, I feel like they need to get him in trouble for being bad. I want the fighting and hating to stop.
I wish I could have done something to stop it. I wish he accepted that he needs help. I wish he could see that he is at fault. I wish he could put himself in our shoes. I try to keep Sean safe in our room, and we talk about the things we wish for. We wish that people would be kind to us, because we feel the pain too. We carry the feelings in our hearts.
We want people to listen to us and believe what we say.
We want people to tell us it's not our fault, and we want to be asked about what happens next, because that affects us a lot. Most of all, we want you to see us, hear us,
and keep us safe.
Okay. So the words of the children and young people in that animation were all unfiltered. The graphics and ideas came directly from the children and young people themselves. On a positive note, if I did have at our launch, we did have a playing or recording of children talking about how they found that process and what they thought of the animation itself, but after seeing it for the first time. Many of the children and young people felt that it accurately reflected that this is their day-to-day, and that adults will now see what this is really like for us. They were so proud to being part of it and felt that it was a real opportunity for them to be heard and to be seen. Some children and people felt it was the first time that they felt heard and seen, and they felt validated. Some of the workers fed back that this was a very therapeutic process for the children to be involved in for the past 12 months. So when we talk about trauma and domestic violence, there's no doubt that the experience of domestic violence is taken with children from the time they get up in the morning to the time they go to bed, and stays with them all day. And anything that we can do to support children and young people in their recovery, in their crisis, through early intervention and prevention. With high hopes for the next strategy in terms of it focus on children and domestic violence. And we'll see the final version of that next month. So it is very hard to see this animation, and we may well, how can we help children? Luckily for you, we asked the children as well, how can us professionals help you to recover? How can we hear you? How can we see you? And how can we keep you safe? So the children came back with incredible ideas and many ideas, and we have put them together into a lovely infographic, and it's called, we set it in the context of children's rights. Again, we believe this is the right of children, that this is how they are responded to when they experience domestic violence and abuse. That is no longer, we should be considering a best practice, that we need to consider it as a child's right. So this is an infographic that we made for the children and young people made. Now, you see that? It's called Our Rights and Your Responsibilities, and there are 20 key messages for all of us to respond to children living with domestic violence and abuse. I'm just going to touch through some of them, but each one of them on their own. I'd love a bigger page and a bigger screen to really give them justice. The illustrator had a really hard challenge, but I think she done a lovely job. Again, the graphics in it were ideas for the children themselves as well. So a lot of things like see us, don't ignore us, we have lived with it too. Listen to us, believe everything we say. I know that's a real barrier for mothers and victims living with domestic violence and abuse, and they feel they're not believed, but it came back really strongly in a lot of feedback from the children and young people that they feel that they're not believed because of their age. Take time, always tell children it's not their fault, that sense of responsibility that is carried through with them all the time as well. And number 4 there, be kind because we feel the pain too. That really stands out. There's another one, where is it, the questions? Always ask us questions, allow us to ask us questions, even if we have to ask them 10 times. Sometimes we feel when children ask us the same question, we have to give them a different answer because they didn't hear us the first time and they didn't understand the first time. Sometimes it's not, they just need that reassurance and that repetition. Keep us safe. Allow us our independence. That's that sense of agency that they want to be involved in decision making. Be patient. And number 9 there, always ask how we feel. Even if we look happy, sometimes we can look happy, but we are hurting. So this is available on the Bernardo's website in a PDF version. I know many places like it's free to download and easily accessible there for everybody as well. So all the resources that I spoke about today, this is the shared understanding that I mentioned at the very start, that we spent 2.5 years putting into to really understand children's experiences. And they are teaching us for the last 3 years about their own experience of domestic violence and abuse. So this is available. I'm happy to send on all these resources today. There's a background to it, and domestic violence and abuse is set in the lens of coercive control and takes a standpoint that all forms of violence are harmful. So the children's definition is also part of that. I haven't even gone into the children's definition here today, but you're more than welcome to download this as a resource, or I'll send it out after. And the shared understanding of service providers that came from the community practice that we're working with, and a subgroup which is led by Steph Holt as well. And then I went through also period of consultation with services around Ireland, and it was peer reviewed last year. And there are some 10 important factors that shapes children's experiences of domestic violence and abuse. That's my presentation today. Apologies for my brain fog and croaky voice. I'm really, really honoured here to have an opportunity to present the words of children and young people.
That was fantastic, Anya. Thank you very much. And it's coincidental at the moment because in the background I can actually hear a TLC course. Not that I can hear it, but I know what's happening in the background, and that's what I had to run out to let somebody in because it was one of the young people coming in for one of the TLC courses. So it's very real right now to me because I have to hush a little bit so I don't disturb them. And also has just to hear again, I suppose, from one of the important things I wanted to do with these presentations, and you all did it very kindly, was to hear the voices of the actors. You know, these are the main protagonists in this world. We are service providers, but they are the ones that are living the reality of it, and it's, you know, great to hear the voices from all the 3 different grounds of our legislation here today. Has anybody got any direct questions for Anya specifically, or to the wider floor? I suppose what struck me most specifically from the 3 presentations is how no matter what we do, what mothers do and children do, the perpetrators are able to use it against them. So I just, you know, I picked up on 3 very different things for yourself, Anya. You know, when the children say, you know, they see immediately the unfairness that he gets away with it. They don't get away with, you know, not doing their homework or raising their voice or not doing their chores, but he gets away with it. And then these protections that are put in place for our, you know, our border sovereignty, you know, our visa rules and our migration rules, then the perpetrator can use those as another weapon. And so the legislation in Ireland is actually weaponized to bring more control over the woman and the children. And likewise, even after she escapes and gets away from him and is rebuilding her life as the children that you're working with, Anya. But as she does that, then access and custody is weaponized. This again is supposed to be a child-centered and the voice of the child and to hear what the child wants and their rights as a child to have access to both parents. But then that too is weaponized as another weapon of abuse. So I think it's very interesting that, I suppose maybe that's where my head is and might say more about me than your talks. But those 3 elements came out to me that no matter what women do, no matter what the state does, that perpetrators of abuse are able to weaponize it and, you know, turn it against women and children. But that's just fine. That was 2 penny worth. Is anybody else? I can't see everybody. I don't know what I've done wrong again, but has anybody else got any questions? Maybe you want to just shout out if you want to unmute yourself and shout out a question or put it through the chat or query or.
Just comment on what you said just there, Siobhan. I think that came across very strongly when I was doing the small research that I did, and women actually were starting to just give up having any hope in the systems that existed. And they were just starting to turn towards trying to accept that this is going to be what they're going to have to live with, and trying to focus on how they can support their children from one access visit to the next, and the abuse and the terrorizing that happened in between, because it just felt like to them that no matter which way they turned, that the perpetrator was always going to hold a stronger hand, and trying to just be heard in that. And, you know, like in Anya's report from Bernardo's, you know, just trying to hear children's voices and women's voices. It's still so low, like it's like the radio down low compared to what you're hearing about men's rights and the right to access and pro-contact. You know, I think there's a lot to happen yet around the rights of children and really actually understanding what is good and right for them post separation, you know. When a mother tries to actually leave it, you know, that it's just facilitated to go on forever, well, till they're 18 anyway.
I'll mute myself. I think access is a big issue And it's so upsetting to see like how women and children, they are not taken in consideration what they feel, and when they access that they are in danger, or the kids say they don't want to go to their father and they are just not listened to. Like we deal with a case last year that a father kidnapped the kids and brought back to their countries, Pakistan, and they are gone. And because like you don't have nothing to do if they are not part of the
Hague Convention.
Yeah. And so now like the mom is here, like desperate to get the kid back, and what can you do? And this was brought to court so many times of her fear of him to kidnap the kid, and was just not heard. Like, and they give him access over and over again until really happened.
It's problematic.
Yeah.
Anybody else got anything to say or want to make a comment? Somebody left in the chat to thank you for your presentations. It's very important work that's being done. No? Okay. Well, I would just like to thank our three speakers, Anya, Valeria and Geraldine, for coming to us and giving over your time to have that conversation, I suppose, and to share your work, and also to make us all think. And I suppose one of the things that we do have to remember as well is that there will be a child who is from a migrant background whose parents are separated. So there is it's not like these are three individual people that we're talking about. This could be one person with, you know, with 3 different hats on, or ultimately with 9 different hats on. Possibly, I don't know, could you be all 9, but maybe. So we are very aware that there is an intersectionality element here, but to even hear from the different perspectives and the different, I suppose, barriers that are there and challenges that are there within what the general or stereotypical understanding of domestic abuse is in Irish society. You know, you've informed me so much already today anyway. So just on behalf of Clare Haven, I would like to thank you all, and also I'd like to thank, well, I'm very glad staff members have attended, but I would also like to thank our people from our wider network and partners in the county and beyond for coming along today. As I said, there will be, thank you, Jay French, for, she also thanks us for our work. I will be having 2 more panels every Wednesday for the, 2 more Wednesdays between 2 and 4. And if you do want to join the panels, please do, but I will be sending out a fresh link, as I said, to avoid any of that nastiness that occurred over the last couple of months with regards to women's spaces. And we have already got a few people registered already. So if you're not registered already, just give us a call and we'll put your name down. So without further ado, unless anybody has any last minute thoughts, questions, queries?
No, I'd just like to say thank you very much. Enjoyed it. Thanks, ladies.
Thanks very much for having us today.
Yeah, it was lovely to be here. Thank you.